Welcome to Wind Down Friday. We call it Wind Down Friday just to tell people what day of the week it is, just in case you lost track, which means tomorrow is Saturday. And in fact, someone told me yesterday it's Bank Holiday Monday. So for those of you who weren't aware, we've got another long weekend. So I'd like to welcome our panelists today. Leading the conversation in terms of Michelle Morgan, who's known to some of you, founder of Liberty, and but more importantly in this context is an ambassador for Mental Health First Aid England, and is a mental health expert from personal experience, and also founder of Pjoys. And she's joined today by Paul Woolley, who is founder of BAA, and they've put together an interesting paper which is going to take us through, which really kind of combines the mental health and economic well-being in times of turbulence. Turbulence we can understand, economics we understand, mental health we can understand, but what they're going to do is combine all three together and how we can best come out of it. So I can say no more, but hand over to Michelle and Paul. And thank you very much. And if you've got any questions, please put them in the chat box, and we'll pick up these things at the end.
Oh, thank you, Clive. Hi, everyone. Hi. It's still so weird, isn't it? Still so weird.
Very weird.
Even more, I think, like on a Friday, week 8, 9. Do any of us know?
Yeah,
I don't know about you, but I'm starting to feel a little bit discombobulated with it all. And one of my insights, and I'd love, I think both Paul and I would love this to be as interactive as possible. Hi, Suze. You know, this is your time, and if we can facilitate a useful conversation around these topics, or any topic, you know, it's Friday afternoon. Let's make sure this is valuable for you. So put yourselves off mute or write in the comments if you want to stay on a topic or move away from it. But Paul and I were talking earlier about this and kind of noticing, certainly from our own points of view. So I think we'd be interested to see how you're finding it. But, you know, at the beginning of the crisis, and as we entered, you know, before lockdown, and as we entered into lockdown, you know, the world turned upside down. We were all very much in crisis mode, and for some of us that meant extra work on our businesses, and then for others in different kinds of businesses, everything sort of ground to a halt. But whatever type of business you were in, there was suddenly this sense of being generous, and you know, and it's one of the wonderful things that we've seen come out of this at a human level, a community level, but also a business level. And so lots of us have done, you know, stuff for free, which we do in normal times, but it feels like we've done that even more, whether that's for our clients or our industry sectors and networks, or even beyond that. And then what's happened is we've moved now into a space where actually I think we're still doing a lot of the free stuff, but you know, work is starting to feel busier and busier no matter what your circumstances. There was a sense in the first half of lockdown that, you know, things became a little bit more quiet, a little bit more measured, which I know for me was good for my mental health. And actually I started to enjoy life and enjoy work and felt quite creative. And what I've noticed over the last few weeks is that I'm doing quite a lot of paid work and delivery now in the space of mental health by those businesses that are seeing the value of investing now rather than paying later. I'm working a lot on pipeline because I'm getting more inquiries. I'm still doing a lot of the free stuff because being generous, give in order to get, so give more than you get, feels really important. And I think as a result, I am feeling quite tired, along with the whole of the crisis and lockdown. Really, you know, it's been going on for some time. So I was personally, and I think Paul was, quite interested to bring that aspect into our conversation this afternoon, because how long do you do the immense amount of free stuff that we'll be doing for our clients and other during this time, rather than valuing ourselves? And will there be a knock-on effect to that? And in addition, because we're stretching ourselves across more things, you know, is that now having an impact on our mental health and also that of our teams and the people that work in our businesses or in our networks. So comments are open, chat is open. Let's start getting your thoughts on what I've just said, because it might be a load of nonsense. You might not agree, but we could have that as a discussion point as well. And yes, Paul and I have spent actually longer than we first anticipated working on.
I think Michelle, that is very fair.
Yeah, on a bit of a thought piece that was slightly kiboshed because I got the virus for about 3 to 4 weeks. But actually, as we've collaborated on that piece and the moment that we find ourselves in now as businesses, as agencies, as consultancies, we're hoping that piece of work maybe has a little bit more time to breathe and be of use to you and others. And what we've looked at is kind of the combination of what businesses and business leaders in particular need to do now, and what are the interesting ways to be and to think. And we've combined that with the imperative for us to be thinking about our own mental health as leaders, but also to really entrench that in how we are leading our businesses and the decisions we're making, and also the investments and how we are spending our budgets and how we are looking after our people best now in the short term, but also for the long term. So that's kind of a bit of what we've been doing. Paul, would you like to, rather than me, go on?
I think what I would add to that, first of all, good afternoon, everybody. Nice to meet you all virtually. I think just to give you a little background, I have recently come out of the Omnicom network, where I spent 25 years running some of their bigger businesses, and I am now, as they say, going plural, hence business advice and advocacy bar. And I started to put together a paper really around leadership and leadership strategies, which just happened to coincide with the lockdown. And as I finished that paper and circulated it to both clients and some of my former colleagues, the feedback was very positive, but I felt two things. First of all, I felt it lacked something. It lacked any sort of what I would describe as, so what? So what's this about? What am I going to do that's different? And so for that reason, I just decided to sit on it for a couple of weeks. And then Michelle came and spoke to the Memento Network. And as soon as I heard her talk for about 15 minutes, I thought, that's what it's missing. I also was quite unashamedly put off publishing it at that stage, because I'm sure all of us on this call were inundated with so many articles that were going up on places like LinkedIn, and with a whole raft of gratuitous advice. So for my points, I decided let's just hold off. So Mental Health and Mental Health Week, we were very aware of the timing of it, performed a very timely point on this journey for us to actually step in and say, okay, so where are we up to now? We knew it would be 8 weeks in. And Michelle then was a lot stronger to be able to contribute to the paper, because, as she's already indicated, she unfortunately had the virus. And so what we did was pull together my original thoughts around some of the leadership areas and try to make it relevant and answer the so what question. We also were very fortunate in that you'll see in the full paper, and actually, Clive, I'll send you the full version of it so you can share it with the membership. It's quite a long read, and so it doesn't lend itself perfectly for mediums such as LinkedIn. But what we've been able to do is to take something that was actually written originally for the World Economic Forum COVID platform by a guy called Travis Bradbury, and we used some of that in terms of, this is what the World Economic Forum is looking at in terms of the economic effects and also the economic consequences for businesses. And we took that and said, okay, this is how leaders actually react to stress situations. This is how leaders get their way through situations that are just so mind-blowing in terms of we've never had to deal with this before. So how do you deal with all of a sudden your revenue goes from a record month in March, which is one of the businesses that I've been helping, to all of a sudden sat in front of one of the big four banks begging them for 3 million to keep your business open? That is absolutely mind-blowing for somebody or three shareholders that have built a business, just got to their late 50s and were looking to cash in. How do you actually say to them, you've actually got to have the energy, because if you don't have the energy, all your 160 people, they're finished. They're going nowhere. Because if you can't lead them through this, then the agency is going nowhere. And so what we've tried to do in the paper is focus on that and focus on what Travis was actually saying in terms of these are the best things that you would see. And in the first part of the paper that we published on Tuesday morning, it actually took a macroeconomic look in terms of the things that the agencies will be faced with. They'll be faced with things that they've never, ever been faced with in their life. And actually, how do you actually deal with that? But Michelle will talk, I'm sure, when we come to it. There's things that are coming out now more and more that we all read in the quality press. So, for example, Zero Suicide Alliance released, and it was on the BBC website last weekend. They've had 503,000 online courses booked in the last 8 weeks. That apparently is up by a factor of 30 compared to the last full year. So stuff like that, Mish will talk to when we get to that sort of thing in terms of mental health. And now all of a sudden, again, Michelle will talk about, leaders are taking it very, very seriously, the impact on their people. And actually, it isn't just the commercial impact, it isn't just the financial impact for their business, it's not only what condition is the business going to come out of this lockdown, but what condition are their people mentally going to come out of this lockdown? And that is something that, again, as business leaders, we've not had to deal with in our lifetime. So we focused on that. We've then taken in the second part of the paper, we've actually looked at the key skills that we believe are necessary, and we could touch on those, Michelle, as we go through the next 20 minutes or so, the headlines of it. And we've actually then looked at some micro things. So looked at the way clients are reacting in this period. So examples like all of a sudden retainers are being cancelled. All of a sudden pitches are being put up. All of a sudden they've given us notice. How do we deal with those things? How do we make sure that when we come out of lockdown, the business actually has a structure that it can actually perform? Because obviously at the moment there's a phenomenal amount of focus on cost savings. It's all about taking cost out. So that's the context of what we've tried to do, and we've tried to give some answers in the second part of the paper, which we'll be publishing later today. And then we focused on what the business needs now, what it's going to look like going forward, and what it does to come out of those things. So that's why we came together, and that's how the context of this really got going. I actually think, to be perfectly honest, Michelle's illness, although it actually helped the paper because it stopped us and it slowed us down. And when we came back to it, we both looked at it in a completely different way, given where we're up to with the lockdown and also Michelle's own experiences. So, Mish, do you want to carry on a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And we're just aware Paul has to leave this call at 2:45. I can stay on until until 3 o'clock. That's absolutely fine. So we've got a couple of very sparse slides, but that we thought might help keep us on track. But and I've shared a link for part 1, and I've shared just the Word document for part 2. So if you do want to open it up, because we're not going to get into massive details, so I think this is your time. If you can listen and open up at the same time, pull things out that you think might be interesting for us to explore as a group. But I will share just the top line of what we want. Right, can anyone see that? My screen sharing is paused. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. Love it when it works. I don't know if it's a bit early for the drinks or even your seedlet, but if you want to, do join in. So I just want to, so this might feel like a real luxury, but I want to try and demonstrate something to you by focusing on the first point, which is me asking you how you are. In fact, really, I'm going to ask you to ask yourself how you are. So I'm going to come straight out of this just for a moment. And I hope that it does demonstrate something. Can you, anyone want to give me a word just from the gallery? If you want to unmute yourself. How are you? If you could just have 1 or 2 words. Sharon says in chat that you think leaders are exhausted.
Yeah, and I'm exhausted, but happy, actually, weirdly. Liberated and tired, yeah.
Yeah, the ups and downs.
Yeah.
Magnus, are you coming off mute there?
I am, yeah. I was just about to say I'm weekend ready. I think it's kind of I'm with other people. I've never been as busy in many ways, and also the nature of the work is a lot of it is sort of content creation, because client work is a little bit for me less busy. So I'm in that mode of always thinking, creating stuff. It's exhausting, but good, Weekend ready there.
Yeah, thank you. A lot of you finding that actually it's quite a creative time for you. I think that depends on our stress levels and what is happening in our businesses and professionally. But I have found it an amazingly creative time. I wrote my first poem last week. Then I made it into a movie, an iMovie. Actually, I'm finding it a really good time to learn. Anyone else want to say how they're feeling?
My creativity has come out through conversations with my team whilst Zooming. I think the hardest thing, which I've learned, and I think I'm becoming slightly more comfortable with it, is to try and make people laugh. Rather than go straight in with the meeting agenda, close the meeting agenda and say goodbye, or you preface it with how are you, without real sincerity. I spend about half of the time trying to get them into a good space before we start talking about the work or the project. So that has been exhausting, but it's been very rewarding at the same time.
Yeah, it requires a new level of energy, I think, I certainly see that when I'm either presenting or delivering training on Zoom or just catching up with someone. It does require different energy because you are not in the room. You cannot have that human connection that you will, even the unconscious things that you'll pick up. But yeah, because it's forcing us to think differently. That's brilliant. But there's a lot of Zoom fatigue, and Stephen and I were talking about this earlier. So we've got to be mindful of that as well. The screens are draining. One of the leadership points that Paul and I put in the first part of this is that leaders stop and breathe. And I'm going to ask you to do that just for a second. So what I'm going to ask you to do is close your eyes. If you don't feel comfortable closing your eyes, then just lower your gaze. And I'm just going to ask you to take less than a minute to just stop and focus on your breath, the cold of the air as you breathe in through your nostrils. And as you breathe out, the warmth that you notice. This minute is for you, no one else. And I just invite you to connect with how you feel right now on Friday at 2:23. And now I invite you to ask the question, what do you need? What do you need? I'm going to ask you to open your eyes, because we ain't got long. Come back into the room. Yeah, this is a leadership tactic. This is a human tactic. We are finding it more and more difficult because we're adapting to the new ways, because we feel creative, because we're dealing with crisis, to take those minutes to really stop. And if you do that exercise where you give yourself, even if it is only 1 minute, to just concentrate and notice your cold breath in through your nostrils and the warm breath out of your nostrils. And when your mind wanders in that minute, and it will, because that's what the mind does, that's okay. Don't beat yourself up. Don't say, I can't do this blooming meditation or mindfulness that she hasn't said the word up until this moment. That's what you're meant to do. Your mind is meant to wander. We're thinking all the time, but that thinking, if you can just give yourself a moment to come back to the breath, into the present, I promise you it will give you just a moment of potential renewed energy, and probably be the start. If you can do it for longer, it'll be the start of some new thinking or finding a solution to something that is going around in your head. So rather than thinking about it, encouraging yourself not to think and just concentrate on your breath. This is a leadership tactic. So I give you that. It's not witchy, hippie stuff. This is evidenced. This is evidence stuff. So I give you that. Paul, do you want to say anything about the top line?
I was just going to add to that, really, just whilst Michelle's encouraging us all to reflect and take a moment. Whilst you're reflecting and taking a moment, just picking up on what Carl said about getting the energy and getting his team going and getting those meetings going. Just have a think, an honest think about the quality of the Zoom and the team meetings that you've had in the last 24 hours. Just think about it. Just think about, were they better or were they worse than they were 8 weeks ago? And that is a really interesting question to ask yourself. Ask yourself, how much more have you got out of those meetings in the last couple of days compared to what you did right at the start? I would respectfully suggest is that the majority of you will make a conclusion that when we started all of this, it was all a bit of a novelty. A fair few people had no idea what Zoom even was, how Teams worked, etc., etc. We would jump on Google Hangouts, let's get onto a Skype call, etc., etc. People would be dropping out, a bit like, almost as somebody said to me yesterday, a bit like the old-fashioned teleconference meetings where somebody's driving down the M1, somebody's coming out of London. Actually, with a lot of the mediums that we're now using, the quality is far better. And actually, once we've all got used to it, it becomes a different norm. And it does become a different norm, and it's working for a lot of businesses. Again, it must be working for businesses when you look at things like Twitter's announcement over the last 7 days, where they're talking about their new norm will not be that you have to attend the office. Facebook have said exactly the same, okay? So why are they doing that? Because they're actually finding that they can do business in this way. So it creates, we know already that this is a new norm. It's not going to change. You read some of the marketing press, you read any of the quality press, and actually some of the stuff that's being produced is being produced in lockdown. Everybody nodded when the question was asked, have you been more creative? So actually, leadership has got to try and find a way to lead in a remote situation. Now, I realize that we probably all had employees that work all over the country, but this could be where you perhaps see your employees 2 or 3 times a year. Wow, that is a really scary thought. I was on a call before lunch where an organization was talking to me about they're looking at their property portfolio and they're now trying to find a name for what they're going to create to be their own WeWork space. They're going to create a WeWork space, and that WeWork space is going to be used by their employees, but everything else they're going to try and get rid of as quickly as they can. That might not be the right thing for everybody, but it starts people to think of a different way. my daughter's organisation, she had an email this morning saying not to expect to come back in the office this side of the end of the year. And that's very, very, very open. My son works for one of the big 4 consultings. They normally work on site with clients 4 days a week. They are now being told not to expect to work on client sites more than 2 days a week. So my point follows and complements what Michelle's saying. We're already starting to form the new norm, whether we think it or not. And actually, when you come off this and read the paper, which hopefully you will do, you'll pick some things up in the paper that help you to actually form a framework for what the new norm might be. And that's what Michelle and I tried to do, to actually start you to think about, actually, what does my business look like in the future? Where is it going to add analysis? Now, I'm sorry, I'm just conscious that that was more than a little bullet point there, Michelle.
No, it's fine. Look, everybody, the truth is, Paul and I are quite pooped by the end of the week. So we took a decision that we'd wing it today and be really honest about that and try and tap into just some of the things that we've covered in the 2 papers. So I've just cut and paste this features in at the top of part 1 in the paper, but here it is. Just take these, copy and paste these stats and hold on to them, because Deloitte early at the beginning of this year published a paper, and it was it was an update on the facts and stats around the cost of poor mental health to the economy and to employers at 45 billion each year, and they've really done a lot of. They spent a lot of time looking at actually what was the return on investment for if you do invest in supporting the mental health and well-being of your people. So for every £1 spent, employers get £5 back. Now, I would just urge you to look at all of those stats and take the words presenteeism, absenteeism, staff turnover, and just that sense check that all of those things were before the coronavirus and the crisis. That we are in a physical crisis, we are in an economic crisis, we are already in a mental health crisis as well. And my gut instinct is that all of those, the mental health crisis will be the one that continues to escalate and will potentially be around for longer than ever. And that will have an impact on the physical of you and your people, and also the economic, the commercials of you and your people. My heart broke. I might have said this on the Pimento call. It might have been after, when someone that I've worked with quite a lot, who knows the value of investing in mental health training, said to me, "I'm sorry, Michelle, I can't do anything at the moment. Mental health and well-being is a budget line that sits in our non-essential, in our budgets." And I get the difficult decisions that we're all having to make in our businesses. But I can't stress how important trying to find a way of investing in the mental health, training, development, awareness, policies, processes, provisions. Yes, that all will take work, but there are ways. And I've had a conversation with Stephen, certainly in terms of Pimento, and I've got a relationship with MAAG. And I think I'm going to try and create something that maybe is a solution for making something affordable but impactful and meaningful, if we can do it across both networks, and if enough people make it feasible, because it's so important for business, but also you. And I would stress that this topic of mental health and well-being has to start with you. It has to start with you looking at how you are understanding your own mental health, your stress levels, in order to be able to look after others. Now, can we just have a show of hands or use chat with people that are not on video? Who knows about the stress container as a model? If lots of you do, I won't show it to you. So I've got 2 hands up here. and I can't tell from, so Chris and Magnus, you both know about stress container. Would you mind bearing with me while I just show it to people as something I can share? Okay, I'm going to go back into share screen. I'm going to take you through it just really quickly, and I'm happy to share the model with you. Okay, so we all have a stress container, or sometimes it's known as a stress bucket. The size of that bucket or container will vary from individual to individual. Your vulnerability, it represents a side of your vulnerability to developing poor mental health. And your vulnerability and the size of it depends on you being you and everything in your lifetime, including what your birth was like and your genes that makes you you. So we all have a different size vulnerability. Some people can manage more stress than others, and we just don't need to be judgmental. We just need to be aware of the size of our own container. Stress, everyday stress, good and bad, flows into the container. Not all stress is bad. Stress is a good thing because it taps into our fight, flight, freeze response, which is a natural response. The problem these days, and probably escalated in Corona times, is communication, always on, technology, which are amazing things in our life, but that we all know, and perhaps even more, mean that we're staying in that stress mode with that cortisol flowing through us, and it's never coming down, and that's when physically and mentally we become at risk. So how do we manage stress? Well, if you imagine on your bucket there's a tap or a valve, there are helpful coping strategies. And can you use chat now to give me some examples of helpful coping strategies to manage stress? And can someone read them out, because I can't see chat when I'm in here?
Yeah, I'll read them out.
Thanks. Anything coming through?
Fitness.
Take exercise, share the problem, swimming, walking, rest, get help to prioritize. That's a very good one, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there are the unhelpful coping strategies.
Hobbies, meditation.
Yeah, give me some unhelpful ones.
Gin.
Drugs.
Alcohol and drugs.
Yeah. What else?
People saying don't worry.
Dancing with other people.
Yeah.
Taking out on others.
Yeah, absolutely. Not taking time for ourselves, not talking. Okay, so if when stress rises, we're more likely to use the unhelpful coping strategies, because that's just how we're built. And if you use those unhelpful coping strategies, the tap will get blocked, and your bucket or your container overflows. And that is called your emotional snapping point. We all have an emotional snapping point. We are not invulnerable to it. But we can be aware of when that stress is rising. If we can be aware of it and know what our signature stress indicators look and feel like, we'll all have our own individual ones. Mine will be staying online for longer, doing one more email, trying to get that one thing out today. It might be an extra drink rather than just the one that I might enjoy. That could turn into another. Stopping exercising, stopping talking, but you'll have your indicators. If you can be aware of all these things, you can start to manage your stress better. That is a leadership issue. This is not just a well-being issue. This is a leadership issue. And you can share this model to have conversations with your leadership teams, your management teams, your people who are line managers can also use this. I can take you through it in more detail, but actually it's a pretty simple model for you to understand. And I want to give that to you in the spirit of kindness, which is the theme of Mental Health Awareness Week. So I hope what I'm starting to bring to life here is there's some of the business imperative and actually the business case, which you get in the Deloitte numbers, but I hope you start to get that sense of it being in the two-part paper that Paul and I have written, which we have barely got into, that they're not two different conversations.
No. I think
Can I just add?
A great example. Sorry.
Sorry, Paul. Can I just add, Michelle? Kratos, which is part of the Advertising Association, they've been running a fortnightly survey across the industry as to how agencies and the industry is coping. And in the last one of the questions to employees was, how well their employers are in managing them and their well-being. And 92% actually gave a positive response, which was really interesting, because I think if this was done 4 months ago, it would have been a much smaller number. So during all the furloughing, people are, this is of the last study, was coming out a very positive number that well-being is being shown by leadership.
Yeah, and that doesn't surprise me, Clive, at all. And it's been absolutely brilliant to see. Here's my worry, is that as we move into the next phase, which is going to feel different, and a lot of the time we're going to feel more comfortable with these ways of working. My fear is that our stress levels are going to escalate. The pressure that we're putting on ourselves and the demands of our business and our clients. My fear is it will come down. I hope it doesn't. But, I think we had to have kindness and consideration, because how could we not? In these first 9 weeks, we had to look after people physically and mentally because of everything that was going on. It was so suddenly different. As we get used to it, my fear is that aspect may wane. I might be wrong, but I suppose that's why, we're keen to keep being noisy around this topic from a business commercial point of view, but also the human imperative as well.
Okay. I'm conscious that Paul's got to go in probably 5 minutes. If there's anybody who wants to put any questions to Paul,
just one
particularly
in mind.
Yes, please, Carl.
Do you have any examples of why you believe that the tolerance of this stage will wane?
Of what? Sorry.
This stage that we're in. Michelle described the first stage, which is shock, I suppose. Second stage.
I can give you an example of that from today, Carl. I outlined earlier my conversation where the organisation I was talking to before this call was talking about their WeWorks going forward. And I said, okay. And so what are the benefits of that? And on the call was the CEO, the creative director, and one of the principal shareholders. And straight away, they all said, well, we'll save costs. We'll reduce our costs of the offices. Oh, okay, very good. And of course, we'll save cost on furniture. I said, okay, right, very good. So once we went through all of these fairly sort of predictable answers, Carl, I said to them, okay. And so we're all sat in quite comfortable environments, looking across the sort of the range of people sat there. There's nobody sat that I can see in one-bedroom apartments in the rough end of London. What about all of the kids aged just out of university that are sat in a one-bedroom apartment? And actually, the reason they've come, just for that example, to London is part of the experience. They didn't sign up to living in their one-bedroom apartment to work. And actually, have you thought about that? And the principal shareholder said, excuse me, OF. No, I never thought of that. And I said, have we even thought about the practicalities of the working environment of those people at home? It's fine, as Michelle says, for the first 8 or 9 weeks. What sort of seat are they sat on? Are they sat on the edge of the bed with their computer on their knee? Yes, a lot of them will be. Do they have a proper desk to sit at? What happens in 5 years' time when we get all the claims because they didn't have a proper seat and we didn't assess their work environment? So I think that's a real example of the next stage of actually properly caring for all the people that work for us. And
Paul, can I build on that, Paul?
Yeah, of course.
So I totally agree with Paul there, and I think that assessment's bang on. And Sharon, I concur with your point of view earlier on about the fact that I'm quite enjoying working in this environment. I'm enjoying not having to slug into town and put up with the dreadful commute. But the reality is, Paul says, I mean, my son's 27. He's in that one-bedroom environment, and he can't wait to get back into the office next week. And he also works for an agency. So I think that the dilemma that we're going to face is frustration, because, as Michelle said, I think the next stage is we're all very comfortable in this environment now. We are very efficient with our time, albeit we're working much harder because we're having to get around everyone. What happens when you're into it? I don't think a word's been coined for it yet. When you're in a situation where you've got some people in the office, some of those people are having to rotate because there's only allowed to have 30% of the headcount in there at any one time. You've got senior management like ourselves wanting, frankly, to work from home if we can, but having a responsibility to be in the office to support those younger people people, and to be able to actually help to educate and to give them mentoring and so on. How are we going to manage that? Because I can just see it's going to double the workload for everyone on this call if we're not careful, because in one shape or form we'll want to exist like this, and we'll still have employees who are working in this sort of environment, and we'll also have equally a third of our potentially working in what was the office, or a smaller office, or a WeWork, or whatever it happens to be. And actually managing across platforms and locations with people at different environments is going to be incredibly difficult, I suspect.
Yeah.
Sorry, can I just, Chris who's on the line, if you could unmute yourself, or I can unmute. I mean, you've got quite a large infrastructure. What thought have you guys given to the new norm?
In terms of workspace well-being and things like that? Or
Workspace particularly, let's say.
So we've already, as soon as it happened, we asked the team to do a little self-assessment of their workspace and flag immediately if they needed any additional kit purchasing or sending to them. So we did that. I do think though, and we've got this this Peakon anonymous survey thing that gets sent out every month or two. Some of the responses coming back now are actually kind of asking for phase 2 of the workplace assessment, and everyone's been very patient until now, and we've given them the smaller bits, but I think we're now kind of moving to a second level where more kit or infrastructure for well-being will be needed.
Can I just say as well that I think there's a culture issue here as well. So when everyone's sort of quite disparate and working disparately, that culture and the collaboration and how can I help you, which leads to better well-being and talking in the workplace. I think that's going to be something we need to look at.
Totally. I think I take the point that you're more creative in these situations to a point, but I'm just missing collaboration, and I can't wait to get back to the office. And we survey out to all our staff. A lot of them are young people in those one-bedroom flats, and I am sure they'll all be desperate to come back. So, and I think we've got to guts it out. I mean, we've got a plan that the whole office is back in September, unless there's some massive government intervention. And we have to do that. We have to fight this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe we're being more creative, not because we're at home, but because we were forced suddenly, without warning, to be different.
Yeah.
And of course, that forces creativity and innovation. And actually, we should be trying to engineer more of that in our day-to-day, whether we're at home or back in the office. But I suspect that's a lot of it is that is why we have felt more creative. Carl, just to respond directly to your question, which was what was my evidence? I don't have empirical evidence, but I have had 2 agencies who I've been developing really exciting programs for in terms of mental health training and development and support. We've worked on it for 3 weeks. Within 4 days of one another, they have pulled out. We've got dates in the diary, 4 dates were in for next week, and they've both wobbled massively. Yeah. Now that is a worry to me on a number of levels, let alone my own mental health as their partner or supplier, which I don't really like that word. Moral imperatives all round. It was so brilliant to see them invest very early on, and I was singing their praises. And as the weeks have gone by, that they're less and less committed to investing in that. And then the other part of that features in mine and Paul's part 1 on what are the macro leadership strategies, and we cite listening to your gut, listening to your intuition as a leader. And so that observation, that thought is based on my intuition as well, and having worked in this space and knowing leadership and business as well. So that's just to answer your question.
I promise you I didn't ask that question, Michelle, in a cynical sense. It's more evidence for dinner table conversations. And this might sound cynical, but I'm a massive fan of well-being, and have been for many, many years. Prince Harry and Meghan did a good job of bringing this issue to the public, but COVID accelerated it significantly. So my only question, not concern, is whether institutions will rush to this well-being process and not really understand what it means, because they've never really invested in it before.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely.
I just think one of the things which I've heard about, and I've seen it actually in my own daughters as well, this thing about choice. You know, this for a lot of business leaders, this idea of working from home was seen as a kind of, oh my God, you know, it's not, you know, there was a certain issue that some leaders had about it, but now people have seen that it is quite successful. It's younger people being given the choice as to where and how they work, as opposed to it being mandated there and there. It creates a sense of freedom for themselves, because if they've got personal choice, they feel better about it. And what we are seeing across our membership is probably a recognition that they need less space, but certainly they must have some space as opposed to no space. So people can have a choice as to where they go and where they don't go, but nothing necessarily being mandated, except for certain team meetings that might be on a weekly basis or a fortnightly basis and so on. But just the idea in terms of, well, you can work remotely, you can work from home, you can come into the office, just takes a lot of pressure off the individuals as opposed to necessarily how they're going to do things, and that helps.
Yeah.
Michelle, can I just say goodbye to everybody? And
yeah.
Thank you very much. Now, I'm already in trouble because I can see there's 18 people waiting for me on another call. So,
thank you very much indeed, Paul. That's been fantastic.
The thing I would leave you all to focus on, when you read the first paper, it will talk about, do not be afraid to change your mind. Do not be afraid to react to changing situations. And I'll give you a great example to evidence that in the last 24 hours. If you've not read it, the Airbnb CEO actually published something yesterday to all of the employees, which of course is leaked out. So Brian Chesky promised every Airbnb 7,500 employees less than 10 days ago there would be no redundancies arising from the changes in their market. He wrote an article that went out to all employees within the last 48 hours that explained that they're going to lose 1,900 employees, and that would be done that day. Now, he explained why he changed his mind and was very open about it and very humble, apologetic. Now, that doesn't make it any better for the 1,900, but when I read it, and I've actually spoke to a couple of senior Airbnb people who were displaced through the process, they said he was genuinely hurting, but he was very, very clear that new information had come to him and he had to change his mind. You'll see in the paper, it talks about this new world and this new order is actually saying it's okay to change your mind. It's actually okay because things are moving so quickly, you cannot forecast what's even going to happen next week. So yeah. I'll leave you with that. And thank you for your time.
Good place to leave. Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you. Right, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
Susie, I think that's a great insight, that home will be our place of work and work will be where we socialize. And that sort of builds on a thought that I have, that, and again, that Sharon, you mentioned culture and the impact on culture. And I think if we have these split ways of working, I just wonder if there is a risk that resentment may start to play a part in businesses from the different people who want to work in different ways because their setup is in different ways, or their character and personality or preferred ways of working, that there is now a greater permission around. I wonder if that's something to look out for, and resentment, you know, can turn into a mental health issue if it's not got permission to be talked about in the business and to come out in its own way. I don't know if that resonates with anyone.
So you say that the leadership should mandate things, or there shouldn't be that?
I think with
flexibility.
I think with, you know, leadership in terms of operations and, you know, how we are working in our day to day, as well as how we are feeling in our day to day, both of these from a leadership level require creating psychologically safe spaces and a permission to talk about either of those aspects. And they're two quite different things, but I think this is, again, what we're trying to say in the paper is they're kind of inextricably linked. You know, if you can create a psychologically safe space for people to say, you know what, Michelle, I get that you like working from home because I've seen you Zoom in and I see your garden and all those plants that you like planting, and you know, I get that, and I want to work in the office, but there's a little bit resentment, and then maybe I go into the office as a leader because, to your point, Stephen, we got to go in, we've got to be present. And what if I start resenting that because we've created this permission around what let's work how we want to work? I just got this feeling that there might be that resentment, and so we've got to find ways to talk about the ways of working. I think it's all very well to say at a leadership level, work how you want to work now, but we've got to guide that and be responsible for that working brilliantly, but also what is the potential fallout? And that's about making contingency plans. And again, this is in the paper. It's like, make decisions. You can change your mind because things are moving so fast. And so be decisive. Always have to be thinking about that B plan as well, just slightly in the background, and using the other people around you, dipping into their strengths as well. So maybe their strength is to come up with the B plan. So we try one way first, but we're always saying, you know what, we might change our minds next week because actually this didn't work. It doesn't feel like it's working. And between now and next week, what is the psychologically safe space and permission for people to be talking about ways of working, but also how they're feeling and their mental health? And this has to come from leaders.
Yeah.
This is about showing your own vulnerability. But the first point in our paper says leaders dial their emotions down, but that we shouldn't be afraid to talk about how we're feeling and bring in a bit of that vulnerability into the conversation, into the business, in as much as we can a measured way, but also knowing, you know what, we're all going to be having the ups and downs at the moment. And if you cry, you know, and if you just, if it comes out that you're really struggling, know that you'll recover from that pretty quickly, and people will probably really like seeing that human side of you as well. Stephen?
I totally agree, and the thing I was going to add is that I think one of the things that's been interesting about this period is because we've all been forced to work from home, it has created a level playing field, and it has meant actually, in some respects, management has become easier. It's been difficult, I think, for more junior and younger members because they always feel the need to be always on, and they don't have the seniority to make those decisions, and therefore they feel that, you know, if there is a 9 o'clock call, then you've got to be on it. I think if we end up in a mixed working environment, and we should ask our teams how they want to work and be open to the possibility that they will change their minds during that process, it's can become a lot more difficult, I think, to manage processes, manage people, and get the sort of creative value that we've actually had in the last 8 to 10 weeks working for us. I think that's going to be something that we're all going to have to learn to do and respect the individual. But at the same time, you know, it's difficult for people to make decisions and not stick to them. For example, if you're a working mum or dad and you've got young kids and you need to be able to get childcare, you can't turn that on, turn it off. And that's going to influence your approach. If, like Susie, you know, you're living in Bath and she's probably actually, on one hand, enjoying the fact she hasn't got to schlep into town on the train, you know, 2 hours either way. On the other hand, she's probably feeling it actually, you know, it would be good to get out of an environment because I've got a young lad who's under the age of 6 running around. So it's really very difficult. And I think as soon as we open the doors again, allow people to go back to their working environments, however that work environment changes, we're going to have a whole heap of things that we haven't really thought about that we're going to have to cope with and deal with. And it's just another layer of management stuff that we're going to have to get bloody good at.
Yeah.
Anybody got a good, an upbeat way to finish?
Oh, no, it's negative. I think it's sort of. I think it's sort of opportunity.
I think it's right. I think it's 100% right. I think it is. And we could be talking about this all day because it is going to. There are going to be this level playing field is not going to be level for very long, and we're just kind of coming out of it. And when you were asking earlier, Michelle, about how we're feeling, my stress at the moment is because I've got used to the new norm, and I know that just around the corner there's going to be a new norm, and I've got no idea how I'm going to respond to it, and that creates stress in its own right.
It is because you are still in flight, fight, freeze response. We all are.
Yeah,
we all are, and that is hard on our mental health.
I describe my perverse adoration of COVID. I don't mean that disrespectfully, to Stockholm syndrome. I've fallen in love with this thing that's holding me back. But that feels like a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
In that I've had to embrace that, and now I don't have a fear of going back into the office. But I'm not running towards it with passion and joy at all. Quite the opposite. I'm still caught between two relationships, one which is here and the other which was, the past.
Yeah.
Really, I really hear that, Carl, but Andrew, you don't feel like that at all, do you?
No, because I'm a collaborator and I like to bounce off people. I mean, I've survived. My mental health is strong, and I've made myself get up every day, because I'm doing a lot of new business development. I haven't got loads of things to work on from a day-to-day basis, but I'll probably get through six hours a day of good work. And I am very strong. But at the same time, I can't wait to get back in the office. I've never liked working from home anyway. We're all hardwired differently.
Yeah. Graham.
Sorry, I wanted to say that I probably agree with Michelle that things will tail off a bit in the care. There will be a different agenda. But thinking back to the Festival of Happiness that we ran last year, a huge part of that was building awareness amongst people going, oh yeah, this is quite new, quite different. Whereas I think now that the mental health and awareness around mental health is massively, massively higher. It's come on such a long way in the last year and probably been accelerated over the last 8 weeks. So I think we have to be thankful for that in a positive sense. Now, it may well not persist at this level when everyone's trying to get back to work, but I think it's come to a very, very high level of awareness.
Yeah.
And I think we have to be very positive about that.
I'm really sorry because I am conscious of time, and I know this conversation could go on for a long time, but I think other people have got to do, and people are dropping off the call. So all I can really say is, Michelle, thank you very much indeed. We've got some nice reading for the bank holiday weekend. So
please don't read it over the bank holiday weekend. I'll be devastated. That is not the message.
No, but it's there.
The message is next week, when you're back in the day-to-day, stop, have a cup of tea or coffee, and please read it then.
Okay. We will read it in our good time. We're very, very, very conscious, but it's fantastic, and I just want on to do it.
You're welcome.
And thank you everyone for the contribution. And we'll see you all again soon. But thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks very much.
Well done. That's really good. Okay. Bye.